Marcus Ellison stood rigid in the Montgomery County Courthouse, sweat beading on his neck, as Judge Evelyn Carver's laughter sliced through the air like a blade, her sharp cackle mocking his plea to save Jamal Carter from a fabricated drug charge. Her pale lips curled as she sneered, declaring his kind always played the victim, her words dripping with venom before denying his motion outright. Then the oak doors exploded inward, federal marshals storming in with a thunderous roar, their purpose unclear. What had Marcus unleashed with his defiance? Before diving into this tale, let us know where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice against corruption, hit like and subscribe, because tomorrow's episode will unravel secrets you won't want to miss. Marcus Ellison adjusted his tie in the stifling air of the Montgomery County Courthouse, his pulse still hammering from Judge Evelyn Carver's public humiliation moments before, her venomous laughter lingering like a bitter fog as the federal marshals retreated without explanation, leaving a courtroom buzzing with uneasy murmurs. He glanced at Jamal Carter, his 22-year-old client sitting beside him with wrists shackled, the young man's dark eyes hollowed by months in a cell, for a crime he didn't commit, a drug charge pinned on him by a system that chewed up black men like kindling. Jamal's faded grey hoodie hung loose on his thin frame, his fingers fidgeting with the frayed cuffs, as if they could unravel the nightmare he'd been trapped in since a routine traffic stop turned into a planted baggie of white powder and a trumped-up arrest. Marcus leaned close, his voice low but steady, assuring him they'd get through this, though the weight of Carver's bias pressed down like a storm cloud ready to burst. The judge sat high on her bench, her silver hair pulled tight in a bun, her thin lips pursed as she shuffled papers with deliberate slowness, her earlier outburst now cloaked in a veneer of cold professionalism. But Marcus could feel her disdain, radiating across the room, a silent promise that justice here was a game rigged against him. The prosecution's table was a stark contrast, where Assistant District Attorney Clayton Reed, a wiry white man in his early 30s with slicked-back hair and a tailored suit, radiated confidence, his polished shoes tapping rhythmically on the marble floor as he arranged his notes with the smugness of someone who knew the deck was stacked in his favor. Reed had built his career on convictions, not truth, and his record showed a particular knack for putting black defendants away, a pattern Marcus had studied late into the night. For weeks, knowing he'd face not just a biased judge but a prosecutor who thrived on the system's cracks. The jury, a mix of 12 faces ranging from a middle-aged white woman clutching her purse to a young black man with a skeptical frown, shifted in their seats, their eyes darting between Marcus and the bench, sensing the undercurrent of something rotten in this Nashville courtroom, but unsure how deep it ran. Marcus stood as the bailiff called the session to order, his polished wingtips clicking softly on the floor, his charcoal suit crisp despite the heat, every inch the seasoned civil rights attorney he'd become after 20 years of fighting, battles most lawyers wouldn't touch. He began his defense with precision, laying out Jamal's story, a kid who'd been working double shifts at a downtown diner to save for community college, pulled over for a taillight that wasn't even broken, only to find himself face down on asphalt with Officer Dale Hargrove's knee in his back, a plastic baggie magically appearing in his pocket as the cop smirked and muttered slurs under his breath. Marcus presented the evidence with methodical clarity, starting with dashcam footage he'd fought tooth and nail to obtain, the grainy video showing Hargrove's gloved hand slipping something into Jamal's jacket before the arrest, the audio catching a faint chuckle as the officer radioed in a big catch. He moved to Hargrove's personnel file, obtained through a public records request after months of stonewalling, revealing a history of complaints, 6 prior allegations of planting evidence on black men, none investigated, each swept under the rug by a precinct that protected its own. Marcus's voice carried a steady fire as he addressed the jury, pointing out inconsistencies in Hargrove's report, timestamps that didn't match, witnesses who saw nothing in Jamal's hands before the stop, and a lab test showing the baggies. Fingerprints belonged only to the officer, not his client. Hargrove sat on the witness stand, his broad shoulders filling out his pressed uniform, his square jaw set in a defiant line, his pale blue eyes glinting with amusement as Marcus cross-examined him. The officer's answers clipped and rehearsed, claiming he'd found the drugs in plain sight, his smirk betraying the lie as Marcus pressed harder. asking why the dashcam showed no such thing, why his gloves were off in one frame and on in the next, why his record stank of unpunished misconduct. The jury leaned forward, some scribbling notes, others exchanging glances, their discomfort palpable as the truth clawed its way into the light. But before Marcus could land his final question, Carver's gavel cracked like a gunshot, her voice slicing through the room with icy authority, dismissing his line of inquiry as irrelevant, her thin glasses glinting as she stared him down, her expression a mask of contempt that dared him to push further. He tried again, objecting to Hargrove's evasive answers, citing precedent from a state Supreme Court ruling on admissible testimony, but Carver waved it off with a flick of her wrist, her tone dripping with mockery as she told him to stop wasting the court's time with theatrics, her words echoing her earlier public scorn, a reminder that she held the reins here, not justice. Reed seized the opening, calling Hargrove a decorated officer, spinning a tale of a routine stop turned dangerous, painting Jamal as a dealer who'd slipped up. His voice smooth as he fed the jury a narrative Marcus knew they'd been primed to believe. The kind of story that stuck to black kids like tar, no matter the evidence. Every objection Marcus raised was shot down by Carver before he could finish the sentence, her rulings piling up like bricks in a wall, each one slanted to favor the prosecution, her impatience growing sharper with every word he spoke, her lips curling when he cited case law, as if his knowledge itself offended her. The jury noticed, their faces tightening with unease, the young black man in the back row clenching his jaw, the older white woman looking down at her lap, but no one dared speak against the judge who'd ruled this room like a fiefdom for 30 years, her power etched into the very walls of Montgomery County. Marcus felt the momentum slipping, his evidence strong but his voice throttled by Carver's iron grip, yet he caught a flicker of doubt in the jury's eyes, a crack in the facade he'd built his career on exploiting, knowing that even in hostile rooms like this, truth could sometimes pierce through if you struck hard enough. He wrapped up his cross-examination, his tone measured but firm, planting seeds of doubt about Hargrove's credibility, hoping the jury would cling to them when deliberations came, believing, for a fleeting moment, that he'd turned the tide, that reason might prevail in this den of bias. But as the session broke for a brief recess, Carver's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade, summoning Marcus to her chambers with a snap of her fingers, her tone leaving no room for refusal, her pale eyes narrowing as she adjusted her robe and descended from the bench. The click of her heels on the stairs, a metronome of menace. He followed, his briefcase heavy in his hand, the polished wood of her chambers smelling of old books and older grudges as she closed the door behind them, the lock clicking with a finality. That made his stomach tighten, her office adorned with plaques and photos of her shaking hands with governors, a shrine to her unchecked power. She didn't sit, towering over him as she leaned against her desk, her voice low and venomous, warning him to stop digging into things that didn't concern him, her words laced with a threat that went beyond contempt charges or fines. Her implication, clear as she mentioned his name in connection to accidents that could befall those who didn't know their place. Marcus held her gaze, his jaw tight, his mind racing with the realization that her laughter in court wasn't just scorn, it was a declaration of war, and he just stepped deeper into a battle he hadn't fully mapped out, her final words, echoing as he left the room, a promise that if he didn't back off, the consequences would reach far beyond these walls, leaving him to wonder just how far her influence stretched. Marcus Ellison stepped out of the Montgomery County Courthouse into the humid Nashville dusk, the weight of Judge Evelyn Carver's veiled threat still coiling in his gut like a snake ready to strike, her words about accidents and knowing his place echoing louder than the fading hum of traffic on Broad Street, his polished wingtips scuffing against the cracked pavement as he moved toward the parking lot, his mind racing with the realization that this fight had just turned uglier than he'd ever imagined. The sky hung heavy with the threat of rain, a bruised purple that mirrored the bruise blooming in his chest, not from any physical blow yet, but from the dawning certainty that Carver's influence stretched far beyond her bench, her power a web he'd only begun to untangle, her warning a signal flare that he'd poked something far more dangerous than a biased judge. He scanned the lot for his beat-up sedan, its faded blue paint a familiar anchor in the storm brewing around him, but as he turned the corner past a row of SUVs, The air shifted, a prickle on the back of his neck warning him too late, as two shadows, detached from the gloom, their silhouettes broad and menacing under the flickering street lamp, their steps deliberate as they closed in fast. They were on him before he could react, two off-duty cops in plain clothes, their badges glinting briefly. In the dim light as one grabbed his arm, twisting it behind his back with a grunt, the other slamming a fist into his ribs, the impact driving the breath from his lungs as pain exploded white-hot across his side, their voices snarling slurs through gritted teeth, calling him an uppity piece of trash who needed to learn his lesson. Their words a venomous chant that matched the rhythm of their blows. Marcus fought back, years of scrapping in tougher corners of Birmingham, giving him enough grit to land a wild elbow into one cop's jaw, the crack of bone on bone buying him a split second as the man staggered back, cursing, but the other was bigger, faster, his knee driving into Marcus's gut, sending him sprawling to the asphalt, his briefcase skidding into the shadows as they loomed over him, their laughter a sick echo of Carver's cackle in the courtroom, a reminder that this wasn't random, this was ordered, this was personal. Blood trickled from his split lip, the copper taste sharp as he gasped for air, his vision swimming but his mind razor-sharp, locking onto their faces, one with a scar slicing through his brow, the other with a crooked nose that looked like it had been broken too many times, their sneers branding themselves into his memory as he rolled away from a swinging boot, scrambling to his feet with a surge of adrenaline that burned through the pain. He bolted toward a narrow alley between the lot and a shuttered pawn shop, his lungs screaming as he ducked behind a rusted dumpster, their shouts fading into the distance as they gave chase but lost him in the maze of backstreets, his heart pounding against his ribs like a war drum, his hands trembling as he wiped the blood from his chin, the reality of Carver's reach sinking in like a blade between his shoulders, her warning no longer abstract but flesh and blood real. He caught his breath, his suit torn at the sleeve, his tie askew, and made his way back to the lot under the cover of shadows, his sedan still there but now a wreck, all four tires slashed deep, the rubber sagging pathetically against the rims, a jagged scratch across the hood spelling out a slur he wouldn't repeat, the letters raw and hateful, in the pale glow of a nearby streetlight. Tucked under the windshield wiper was a crumpled note, the handwriting sloppy, but the message clear as day, warning him to back off or next time it'd be his family, the words sending a chill down his spine, colder than the night air, the implication, slicing through his haze of pain, dragging his thoughts to Lena and Aisha, his wife and daughter, alone at home while he was out here fighting a war he hadn't fully understood until now. He pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed a contact in the Nashville PD he'd known since law school, a detective who'd always been straight with him, but the call went to voicemail, leaving him to mutter a quick message about the attack, knowing deep down it wouldn't matter, that the system protected its own, that these cops weren't rogue but sent, their fists an extension of Carver's gavel, her influence a poison seeping into every corner of this city. He hailed a cab instead, the driver's eyes widening at his battered state but saying nothing, as Marcus slid into the back seat, his mind churning with questions that had no answers yet, like who'd tipped these cops off so fast, how deep Carver's network really ran, and what kind of hell she'd unleash if he didn't stop digging, the note's threat looping in his head as the cab pulled away, the courthouse fading into the night behind him, a monument to a justice he was starting to think might never come clean. He pieced it together as the cab wove through downtown, the neon signs blurring past in streaks of red and blue, his ribs throbbing with every bump in the road, the memory of Hargrove's smirk on the stand flashing back like a warning signal, the officer's pale eyes glinting with something more than amusement, something like recognition, as if he'd known Marcus would pay for his questions before the day was out. It hit him then, a gut punch harder than any fist, that Hargrove wasn't just a dirty cop, he was Carver's enforcer, her attack dog on a leash she'd yanked tight after their meeting in chambers, her warning about accidents no idle threat, but a promise she'd already set in motion. The alley beating a first strike meant to break him before he could dig deeper. He clenched his jaw, the pain in his side sharpening his resolve, knowing he'd have to move faster now, smarter, because if Carver was willing to send cops after him in broad daylight, she wouldn't stop at a few bruises. And that note about his family wasn't a bluff, it was a countdown. What kind of pull did Carver really have to turn cops into her personal hit squad without a second thought? How many others had she silenced like this, their stories buried under Nashville's shiny surface, their voices snuffed out before they could scream? And what would she do next, now that Marcus had survived her first warning, now that he'd seen the faces of her dogs and lived to tell about it? Drop a comment with the number 1 if you think Carver's corruption runs deeper than anyone dares to admit. Give a like if you're rooting for Marcus to keep fighting this rigged game, and subscribe, because this story's only getting darker. What happens when a man like Marcus realizes the threat isn't just to him, but to the ones he loves most? Marcus Ellison barely registered the cab's final turn onto his quiet street in East Nashville. The ache in his ribs, a dull roar as the driver's radio murmured a late-night jazz tune, the notes jarring against the chaos in his mind. The crumpled note from the parking lot still clenched in his fist, its threat about his family burning hotter than the blood crusting on his split lip. Each word a splinter driving deeper as he pictured Lena and Aisha alone in their small brick house. The porch light's faint glow a beacon he'd always taken for granted until now. He paid the driver with crumpled bills, muttering a thanks as he stepped out, his torn suit jacket flapping in the cool night breeze, his eyes scanning the dark windows of his home, the stillness of the cul-de-sac feeling more like a held breath than peace. Every shadow a potential threat as he climbed the steps, his key trembling in the lock, the door creaking open to reveal a living room that looked normal at first glance. The couch cushions still dented from Aisha's afternoon sprawl, Lena's reading glasses on the coffee table, but the air felt wrong, heavy with an intrusion he couldn't yet name. He called out softly for Lena, his voice cracking as he moved toward the kitchen, his pulse spiking when he saw the back door ajar. The frame splintered where someone had forced it open, the linoleum floor scuffed with muddy boot prints that didn't belong to any of them, his stomach lurching as he shouted for Aisha now, louder, his voice echoing through the narrow hall. As he bolted toward her room, the walls closing in with every step, his worst fears clawing up his throat like bile. Lena met him halfway, her face pale under the dim hall light, her braided hair loose from its usual bun, her hands shaking as she grabbed his arms, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush about hearing glass shatter 20 minutes ago, thinking it was just neighborhood kids until she saw the writing on the walls, her voice breaking as she pointed toward the living room, where the curtains hung askew, letting in slivers of streetlight that illuminated the horror scrawled across every surface, racial slurs in jagged red spray paint, the letters crude and vicious, carving hatred into the very bones of their home. Words Marcus wouldn't let his mind linger on but couldn't unsee, their venom seeping into the air like a gas leak waiting for a spark. Aisha emerged from her room, her 16-year-old frame, hunched in a hoodie 2 sizes too big, her eyes wide and glassy with unshed tears as she clutched her phone, her voice barely a whisper, as she said she'd been in her closet texting friends when she heard the crash, staying hidden until Lena called her out, her bravery undercut by the tremble in her hands as she stepped closer to Marcus, her sneakers crunching on glass from a shattered picture frame on the floor, the photo inside one of their last family trip to Memphis, now torn at the edges as if someone had tried to rip it in half. Marcus pulled her into a tight hug, his bruised ribs protesting but his need to shield her stronger, his gaze locking with Lena's over Aisha's shoulder, her expression a mirror of his own dread as she whispered about threatening calls all day. The voice on the other end always distorted, always male, promising to make them pay for Marcus's stunts in court. The calls starting just after he'd left for the courthouse that morning, their timing too precise to be coincidence, too tied to Carver's warning in her chambers to be anything but her handiwork. He moved to the broken window in the living room, the curtains fluttering where a brick had torn through, the projectile lying on the rug with a note tied to it, the same sloppy handwriting as the one on his car, this one reading, "Last warning, lawyer boy, or she's next." The words slicing through him like a blade as he glanced at Aisha, her back now to the wall as she scrolled her phone for distraction, her innocence a target he hadn't protected. Well enough. The realization hitting harder than any punch in the alley, his failure as a father outweighing his resolve as a lawyer in that moment. He dialed 911, his voice steady despite the storm inside, explaining the break-in, the vandalism, the threats, but the responding officer, a wiry white man with a buzz cut and a bored expression, barely glanced at the slurs on the walls, his pen hovering over his notepad as he muttered about kids pulling pranks. Probably just bored teens with spray cans. Nothing to worry about. His tone dismissive as he suggested they clean it up and call if anything serious happened, leaving without taking a report. His squad car peeling away as Marcus stood on the porch. The officer's refusal to care a punch to the gut worse than the beating he'd taken. The system's negligence, a brick wall he couldn't break through with fists or words. Lena started scrubbing the paint off the walls with a rag and dish soap, her hands trembling as she worked, her silence louder than any scream, her strength a quiet fire Marcus had always leaned on, but now felt like a lifeline he didn't deserve. Her whispered question about what he'd gotten them into, cutting deeper than any slur on the walls, her eyes searching his for answers he didn't have yet. Aisha stayed close, her phone forgotten as she helped tape cardboard over the broken window. Her small hands methodical, but her breathing uneven, the weight of the night settling on her shoulders too young to bear it, her voice cracking as she asked if they'd have to move again, like they did after the last threats 2 years ago, when Marcus had taken on a case against a crooked councilman and paid for it with slashed tires and late-night whispers outside their old apartment. He didn't answer, couldn't, his mind racing with how to protect them without losing the fight, how to shield them from a war he'd started but couldn't walk away from, Carver's shadow looming larger than ever, her reach now touching. The only thing he'd thought untouchable. He checked Aisha's room last, his lawyer's instinct kicking in as he scanned for anything they might have missed, his fingers brushing the edge of her desk lamp when he froze, a tiny, blinking red light catching his eye from the corner of her bookshelf, a small black device no bigger than a quarter nestled between her dog-eared copy of The Hate You Give and a stuffed bear she'd had since she was 5, its lens glinting like a predator's eye as he realized it was a hidden camera, its presence a violation so deep it stole his breath, the realization crashing over him that this wasn't just vandalism. This was surveillance. Someone watching. His daughter in her most private space. Their hatred not just painted on walls but embedded in tech, meant to strip her of safety. He yanked it free, his hands shaking as he crushed it under his heel, the plastic splintering with a satisfying crack. But the damage was done, the violation a scar that wouldn't scrub off like paint, the questions piling up like debris in a flood. Who'd planted it? How long had it been there, and what else had they seen? The answers all pointing back to the courthouse, to Carver, to a system that wouldn't stop until it broke him, or worse, broke them. Marcus Ellison sat hunched over his battered laptop in the dim glow of his living room, the cardboard still taped over the broken window, casting jagged shadows across the freshly scrubbed walls, the faint scent of dish soap lingering where Lena had erased the hateful slurs. But the crushed remains of the hidden camera from Aisha's room lay on the coffee table like a grenade with the pin pulled, its tiny lens a silent accusation that kept him awake at 3 in the morning, his bruised ribs aching with every shallow breath as he traced its origins, his lawyer's mind refusing to rest until he knew who dared to violate his daughter's sanctuary. He'd spent hours digging through online forums and tech databases, his fingers flying across the keyboard, following a faint serial number etched into the device's casing, his search leading him to a local Nashville firm called Titan Surveillance, a shadowy outfit known for selling gear to cops and private investigators, its website boasting about discreet monitoring for high-risk targets, a phrase that made his blood boil as he pictured Aisha curled up with her books, unaware of the predator's eye watching her every move. A deeper dive into public records revealed the company's owner, Travis Hargrove, a name that hit like a punch to the gut, the brother of Officer Dale Hargrove, the same dirty cop who'd smirked on the stand while framing Jamal, the connection. Tying Carver's courtroom to this invasion, like a noose tightening around Marcus's neck, he cracked his knuckles, the pain in his side a distant hum as he hacked into Titan's servers, using a backdoor he'd learned from a whistleblower client. Years ago, his screen flooding with files that confirmed his worst fears, a sprawling network of surveillance targeting black activists across Nashville, their names and addresses logged in meticulous detail, photos of protests and private moments captured. Without consent, his own file marked with a red flag labeled Priority Threat, with timestamps of his every move outside the courthouse, the alley where he'd been jumped, even his drive home the night before, the scope of it staggering. A digital panopticon meant to crush dissent before it could bloom. He found emails between Travis and Dale, the brothers coordinating to neutralize Marcus after his courtroom performance. Travis boasting about the camera in Aisha's room as a warning shot, the words searing into Marcus's vision, as he realized this wasn't just about him. It was about terrorizing his family into submission, about breaking him through the people he loved most. The rage bubbling up so fierce he nearly smashed the laptop then and there, but he held it together, knowing he needed more, something undeniable to blow this wide open, something that could turn Carver's invisible empire into ash. He copied the files to a thumb drive, his hands steady despite the storm inside, his mind racing with plans to leak it all to a journalist friend at the Tennessean, imagining the headline that could spark protests, maybe even force an investigation into Carver's ties to this mess, a fleeting hope that felt like a lifeline as he prepared to encrypt the data, his fingers hovering over the keyboard when his screen flickered, a sudden glitch that froze his heart, the cursor spinning as a message popped up. "Nice try, Ellison." The words mocking him in bold red before the entire drive wiped itself clean, every bite of evidence vanishing in a digital purge that left his screen blank, his breath catching. As he realized Travis had been watching him hack, had baited him into this trap, the predator one step ahead while Marcus thought he'd been the hunter, the reversal a gut punch that left him staring at a reflection of his own failure in the dark monitor. Before he could process the loss, a new horror unfolded, his laptop rebooting on its own, folders opening unbidden to reveal images he'd never seen, vile photos of children that turned his stomach, the kind of filth no one could explain away, timestamps freshly minted to make it look like he'd downloaded them himself, the realization dawning cold and sharp that Travis wasn't just erasing evidence, he was planting a bomb meant to destroy Marcus's life, a frame-up so heinous it would bury him deeper than any beating or slur ever could. He yanked the power cord from the wall, his mind screaming to smash the machine. But it was too late, the damage done in seconds, his panic interrupted by the screech of tires outside, blue and red lights flooding through the cardboard cupboard window as heavy boots pounded up his porch steps, the thunderous knock of an FBI raid shaking the house awake, Lena stumbling into the room in her nightgown, her eyes wide with terror as Aisha's voice called from the hall. The chaos erupting before Marcus could even stand, his hands already reaching for the air as agents in black vests stormed in, their shouts overlapping as they pinned him to the floor, cuffs snapping around his wrists with a metallic snap that echoed like a gavel's fall. The lead agent, a stern woman with a buzz cut and a badge that read Agent Carter, barked orders as her team tore through the house, seizing his laptop and thumb drives. Her voice clipped as she read him his rights, accusing him of possession of illegal materials, her eyes hard with judgment as she recited the charges. Each word a nail in a coffin Marcus hadn't seen coming, the weight of the frame-up crushing him as he caught Lena's horrified stare, Aisha sobbing in the doorway while agents rifled through her room again, the violation compounding like interest on a debt he'd never owed. He tried to explain, his voice hoarse as he shouted about Travis, about Titan, about the hack, but Carter cut him off, her tone icy as she said they'd received an anonymous tip, credible evidence that painted him as a predator. The word slicing through him like a blade, the irony bitter as he realized how perfectly Travis had played the system's biases, weaponizing stereotypes of black men as criminals to ensure no one would believe Marcus's truth, the setup so airtight it might as well have been gift-wrapped for Carver's approval. As they dragged him out in cuffs, the neighbor's porch, lights flicked on one by one, faces peering through curtains at the spectacle of Marcus Ellison, civil rights lawyer, now a pariah in their eyes, the news vans already arriving as if tipped off in advance, their cameras flashing while reporters shouted questions he couldn't answer, Travis's final blow landing with devastating precision as the story broke online within the hour, headlines screaming, "Nashville attorney arrested in child porn. Sting." The lies spreading faster than Marcus could fight, his reputation shredded overnight, his name dragged through filth he'd never touched, the public's outrage turning on him like a pack of wolves, social media lighting up with vitriol. As he sat in a holding cell, the cold steel of the bench biting into his bruised back, his mind racing with how to claw his way out of this abyss, knowing Carver's hand was behind it all, her warning about consequences now a reality he couldn't outrun, her empire striking from the shadows while he took the fall. How far does corruption go when it can plant lies this vile in seconds? Can a man like Marcus ever outrun a system built to break him at every turn? And what kind of hell awaits when the world turns its back on the innocent? Drop a comment with the number 1 if you think Marcus deserves a chance to fight back against this sick setup. Hit like if you're stunned by how deep this conspiracy cuts, and subscribe because the darkness is only getting thicker. What happens when a man framed as a monster has nowhere left to run but underground? Marcus Ellison sat in the shadows of a damp basement in North Nashville, the faint drip of a leaky pipe marking time as he adjusted the ice pack against his bruised shoulder, his wrists still raw from the cuffs that had bound him hours ago, the sting of betrayal sharper than the cold concrete floor beneath him, his mind replaying the FBI raid that had turned his life into a public nightmare, the planted filth on his laptop, now a noose around his neck, as he hid from a city that had branded him a monster overnight. Lena and Aisha were safe, stashed with a trusted friend across town, a small mercy arranged by a network of black activists who'd rallied around him when the world turned its back. Their whispers through burner phones, the only lifeline he had, left their leader, a wiry woman named Keisha with a scar across her cheek and a voice like steel, now sitting across from him, her dark eyes scanning his battered face as she outlined the plan that had sprung him from custody. A staged riot at the county jail, giving him the chaos he needed to slip away, leaving behind a cell that reeked of bleach and despair. Keisha handed him a prepaid phone and a fake ID with the name James Carter. Her fingers steady as she explained how they'd smuggled him out in a laundry cart, past guards too busy with pepper spray and batons to notice one more shadow in the fray. Her network's precision a testament to years of fighting a system that hunted them as much as it did him. Her words clipped as she warned him to stay off the grid. No credit cards, no real name. Nothing that could ping the cops, or worse. The bounty hunters she'd heard were already sniffing around for the fugitive threat. Judge Evelyn Carver had painted him as in a press conference just hours after his escape, her voice dripping with false concern as she'd issued a statewide warrant claiming Marcus was armed and dangerous, a lie that turned every badge and every pair of eyes into a potential death sentence, the weight of her influence heavier than the cuffs he'd slipped, her racism now a manhunt with his name on the kill list. He spent the next 2 days moving between safe houses, a blur of back alleys and borrowed hoodies, his face obscured by a baseball cap as he pieced together what he'd lost and what he could still salvage, his mind returning to the Titan surveillance files he'd glimpsed before Travis wiped them, their scope haunting him as he sat in a borrowed attic with a cracked laptop Keisha had scrounged up, its keys sticky but functional as he dug into encrypted backups he'd stashed on a cloud server years ago, old habits from a career of fighting dirty battles, his fingers trembling as he uncovered a thread he'd missed before, a series of wire transfers linking Carver to Dale Hargrove, payments funneled through shell companies that stretched back decades, each one tied to a case where a black defendant had been railroaded, the amounts staggering, tens of thousands. Here hundreds there, a bribery ring so vast it could only mean Carver wasn't just biased. She was bought. Her gavel a weapon for hire in a system she'd gamed to perfection. The revelation of fire in Marcus's chest, as he realized he had something real, something that could burn her empire to the ground if he could just get it out. He contacted a local reporter named Simone Grant, a fierce investigative journalist at a small independent outlet who'd covered his cases before, her voice sharp on the burner phone as she agreed to meet at a diner off Murfreesboro Pike, her only condition that he bring proof. Her skepticism warranted given the headlines still screaming his guilt across every newsstand in Nashville, the weight of public scorn a boulder on his back as he slipped into the diner at 2 a.m. His cap pulled low, the thumb drive in his pocket heavy with the wire transfer records he'd printed out, their numbers a map of corruption he hoped would shift the narrative. Simone sat in a corner booth, her locks pulled back, her notepad already open as she listened to his story, her pen flying across the page as he laid out Carver's decades-long scheme, the payments to Hargrove, the surveillance on activists, the frame-up that had landed him here. His voice low but urgent as he slid the drive across the table, her eyes narrowing as she plugged it into her laptop, the screen lighting up with evidence that made her breath catch, her fingers pausing, as she realized the story wasn't just big, it was explosive. A bombshell that could topple Carver's throne if it hit the right desks. The article dropped online at dawn, Simone's words cutting like a blade through the fog of lies. Corruption in Montgomery County, Judge Evelyn Carver linked to decades of bribery. The headline trending within hours as comments flooded, some calling for Carver's head, others dismissing it as fake news. But the traction was undeniable. Protests sparking outside the courthouse by noon, chants of justice for Jamal mixing with down with Carver, as Marcus watched from a safe house TV, his burner phone buzzing with Keisha's updates. Her voice tight with hope as she said they might actually have a shot now, the public's outrage a shield he hadn't expected. A fleeting moment where he thought maybe, just maybe, the tide was turning, the truth clawing its way into the light, despite Carver's grip on the shadows. But Carver wasn't one to sit idle. Her retaliation swift and brutal. A press conference that afternoon announcing a new warrant for Marcus's arrest, her pale face a mask of righteous fury on the grainy screen as she labeled him a fugitive threat to public safety. Her voice, steady as she claimed his escape proved his guilt, her lies piling up like kindling as she urged citizens to report any sightings, the warrant escalating to include shoot-to-kill orders for any officer who deemed him a threat. The words chilling Marcus to the bone as he realized she'd turned him into a ghost in his own city, a target for every trigger-happy badge and vigilante with a grudge. The racism in her words cloaked as law and order, but clear as day to anyone who'd ever felt the system's boot on their neck. Keisha's network tightened around him, moving him again that night to a new safe house in Bordeaux, a crumbling duplex with boarded windows, her warning urgent as she said Carver had hired bounty hunters, mercenaries who didn't care about warrants or rights, their only goal to collect the price on his head. The stakes now life and death as he clutched the burner phone, his only link to a world that wanted him erased. The attack came at midnight, the safe house's flimsy door splintering. Under a battering ram as 3 bounty hunters in tactical gear stormed in, their silenced pistols spitting bullets that tore through drywall and glass, Keisha shouting for Marcus to run as she fired back with a handgun she'd kept hidden, her shots buying him seconds as he dove for the basement stairs, his heart pounding. As he scrambled through a trapdoor into a crawl space, the damp earth cold against his palms as bullets punched through the floor above, splinters raining down while Keisha's voice cut off mid-scream, the silence that followed heavier than any. Gunfire. He found a tunnel Keisha had mentioned in passing, a narrow passage dug out years ago for moments like this, his body scraping against the dirt as he crawled, the sound of boots thundering overhead fading as he emerged into a vacant lot 2 blocks away, his lungs burning as he stumbled to his feet, the night air sharp with the scent of gunpowder and fear, his mind racing with the cost of that escape, Keisha's fate unknown, but the odds grim, the bounty hunter's attack, a message from Carver that she'd burned down everything to keep her secrets buried, leaving Marcus to wonder how much more he'd lose before this fight was over. Marcus Ellison emerged from the shadows of a Nashville dawn, his borrowed hoodie damp with sweat and dirt from the tunnel escape, his shoulder throbbing where a jagged piece of debris had grazed him during the bounty hunter's assault, the memory of Keisha's cut-off scream still echoing in his ears as he slipped through back alleys toward the Montgomery County Courthouse, his burner phone buzzing with updates from activists who'd rallied to his cause, their network a lifeline. As he prepared to turn himself in, knowing it was the only way to clear his name and face Carver head-on, even if it meant walking back into the lion's den with a target on his back. He'd spent the night piecing together his evidence, the wire transfer records he'd leaked to Simone now printed out in a battered folder clutched in his hand, alongside a USB drive with backups of everything he'd uncovered, Titan surveillances, network, Travis's hacks, Carver's payments to Hargrove, every dirty secret a bullet in a chamber he intended to empty in court, his resolve hardened by the blood already spilled. Keisha's sacrifice, a debt he'd repay by dragging Carver's empire into the light, no matter the cost. He surrendered at the courthouse steps at 7 in the morning, his hands raised as a swarm of officers descended, their shouts overlapping. As they cuffed him again, the metal biting into his raw wrists while cameras flashed from the growing crowd. Activists live-streaming his arrest on every platform they could, their voices a chorus of defiance as they chanted his name, "Free Marcus Ellison." The words bouncing off the courthouse's stone facade as he was led inside, his head high. Despite the exhaustion carving lines into his face, his torn hoodie replaced by a spare suit, one of the activists had slipped him before he turned himself in, the fabric ill-fitting but enough to make him look like the lawyer he still was. Not the fugitive Carver had painted him as. The courtroom was a pressure cooker when he entered, the gallery packed with reporters and protesters, their murmurs a low hum as Judge Evelyn Carver took her seat on the bench, her silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, her pale eyes narrowing at Marcus with a hatred so raw it could have melted steel, her lips twitching into a smirk as she adjusted her robe. The same gavel that had silenced him before now gripped in her hand like a scepter, her authority a throne she'd killed to keep. The hearing began with Marcus representing himself, his voice steady as he laid out the frame-up, starting with the planted filth on his laptop, Travis Hargrove's hack, the surveillance network targeting black activists, every word backed by the evidence in his folder, which he presented to the court clerk with a calm that belied the storm inside. His hands steady as he handed over printouts of emails, bank records, photos of the camera from Aisha's room, each piece a brick in the wall he was building against Carver. The jury from Jamal's case still seated, their faces a mix of shock and unease as they absorbed the depth of the conspiracy. Some scribbling notes while others stared at Carver, their trust in her cracking like thin ice under a heavy boot. Marcus didn't stop there, pulling out the wire transfers linking Carver to Dale Hargrove, payments tied to cases where black defendants had been railroaded, his voice rising as he detailed how she'd taken bribes for decades, her rulings bought by the highest bidder, her racism not just bias but a business, a machine that crushed lives for profit, the courtroom growing quieter with every revelation, the gallery holding its breath as Marcus turned the live-streamed cameras toward Carver, daring her to deny it while the world watched. Carver's face darkened with every word, her fingers tightening around the gavel as she interrupted him mid-sentence, her voice a venomous hiss as she accused him of contempt, of fabricating lies to save himself, her denial a performance for the cameras, but her eyes betraying the panic beneath. The cracks in her facade widening as Marcus countered with more evidence, bank statements with her name encoded in the routing numbers, emails from Hargrove discussing the judge's cut, each piece landing like a hammer on glass, the jury's gasps audible as the truth sank in. Even the prosecutor, a nervous young man named Ellis who'd replaced Clayton Reed, shifting uncomfortably at his table, his notes forgotten as he realized he was on the wrong side of history. Marcus felt the momentum shift, the room tilting in his favor for the first time, the live-streamed footage trending nationwide as hashtags like #ExposeCarver surged, his gamble paying off as the public's outrage poured through the courthouse. Walls a tidal wave Carver couldn't stop, her power slipping through her fingers like sand as the gallery erupted in whispers, some calling for her removal right then and there, the weight of justice finally pressing down on her instead of Marcus. But the victory was short-lived, a fleeting spark before the storm, as a new judge was called in to oversee the hearing, Judge Harold Bennett, a black man in his 60s with graying hair and a reputation for fairness, his arrival a shock to the room as he took the bench with a calm authority, his deep voice cutting through the chaos as he ordered Carver's recusal pending an investigation into Marcus's claims, his ruling swift and final, the gavel's crack a thunderclap that sent Carver reeling, her face draining of color as she stood, her robe suddenly too heavy for her shoulders, her exit a slow march past the gallery's stairs, her lips pressed into a thin line but her eyes burning with a fury that promised retribution, the kind of rage that didn't bow out quietly. Marcus exhaled, his knees weak as he sat, the activists outside cheering loud enough to shake the windows, their voices a balm to the wounds he'd carried too long, the recusal feeling like a crack in the wall he'd been banging his head against. A moment where justice seemed possible, even if just for a heartbeat. Yet as the courtroom buzzed with the aftermath, Carver's shadow lingered, her parting glance at Dale Hargrove chilling Marcus to the bone, the officer stationed at the back of the room nodding slightly as she whispered something to him on her way out, her words too low to catch, but her intent clear as day. A predator circling for another strike, the air growing heavier as Marcus caught the exchange, his instincts screaming that this wasn't over, that Carver's humiliation would only sharpen her claws. He didn't see the full danger until the recess was called, the room emptying as he gathered his papers, a faint whiff of gas tickling his nose, the scent so subtle he almost missed it. But his years in rougher corners had honed his senses, his mind flashing to a case he'd worked years ago involving a rigged explosion, the realization hitting like a freight train as he bolted for the clerk, shouting for an evacuation, his voice drowned out by the sudden roar beneath their feet. Hargrove's planted bomb in the courthouse basement ticking down to 0. Carver's final card played in a game she refused to lose, leaving Marcus to wonder if he'd survive long enough to see her fall. How much deeper does Carver's corruption go when even a courtroom isn't safe? What kind of system lets a judge turn justice into a battlefield with bombs instead of gavels? And who pays the price when the innocent dare to fight back against monsters in robes? Drop a comment with the number 1 if you think Carver's recusal is just the start of her downfall. Hit like if you're stunned by Marcus's gamble paying off, and subscribe because this fight's about to explode in ways no one saw coming. What happens when a bomb meant to silence truth goes off in the heart of justice itself? Marcus Ellison stood frozen in the Montgomery County Courthouse hallway, the faint tang of gas curling up from the basement vents as the recessed chatter of lawyers and reporters buzzed around him, his shout for evacuation swallowed by the crowd's noise, his heart slamming against his bruised ribs as he grabbed the nearest clerk, a wiry kid with glasses who flinched at his grip, his voice hoarse as he barked about the smell, about a bomb, the word barely out before the floor buckled beneath them. A deafening roar tearing through the building as the explosion erupted, a fireball clawing up from below, shattering windows and hurling bodies like rag dolls, the blast's heat searing Marcus's face as he dove behind a marble pillar, glass raining down in jagged shards while screams pierced the smoke, his mind racing with the certainty that this was Carver's doing. Hargrove's bomb her desperate bid to bury him, and every shred of truth he'd laid bare minutes ago. The courthouse trembled as the blast's shockwave rolled through, walls cracking and lights flickering out, plunging the hall into a chaos of dust and darkness. Marcus coughing as he staggered to his feet, his suit jacket torn at the shoulder, his ears ringing with a high-pitched whine as he pulled the clerk up, the kid's arm bleeding from a gash but alive, his wide eyes locked on Marcus as they stumbled toward the exit, shoving past dazed bailiffs and jurors, their faces streaked with soot and terror, the air thick with the acrid stench of burning, wiring and melted plaster, a hellscape unfolding where justice was supposed to stand. He yelled for people to move, his voice roar as he guided a limping woman with a shredded blouse toward the double doors, the crowd surging around him, some clutching briefcases, others cradling broken limbs, the live-streaming activists outside, now shouting through megaphones, their cameras catching every second as survivors spilled onto the courthouse lawn, the building groaning behind them like a wounded beast, its facade scarred with blackened streaks where flames licked at the stone. Sirens wailed in the distance as Marcus counted heads, his lawyer's instinct kicking in even through the haze, his breath catching as he realized dozens were hurt, paramedics rushing in with stretchers while cops cordoned off the block, their radios crackling with reports of no deaths yet. A miracle he clung to as he wiped blood from a cut above his eye, the sting sharpening his focus as he scanned the chaos, knowing he'd saved lives by catching that whiff of gas, knowing Carver hadn't counted on him surviving this either, her plan to silence him backfiring into a spectacle that couldn't be ignored, the news vans already swarming, their anchors stammering through live updates as helicopters buzzed. Overhead, the nation watching a courthouse burn because a judge wouldn't let her secrets die quietly. He stumbled to a paramedic tent, his lungs burning as he waved off a bandage, his mind fixed on the folder of evidence he'd left with the clerk, praying it had made it out, his only weapon against Carver now scattered in the wreckage unless someone had grabbed it, the uncertainty gnawing at him as he caught his breath. the crowd's murmurs swelling with his name, some calling him a hero, others whispering he'd caused this, the split a jagged line he couldn't mend. By noon, the story shifted, Carver's voice cutting through the static of a TV in the triage area. Her press conference a masterclass in spin as she stood in a crisp blazer outside her office, her silver hair untouched by the chaos, her pale eyes steady as she claimed. Marcus had planted the bomb to frame her, a desperate act by a fugitive to deflect his guilt, her words smooth as she painted herself the victim of his vendetta, her lies so bold they twisted the air, turning his evacuation into an accusation, his survival into proof of conspiracy. The racism in her narrative cloaked as concern for public safety, but screaming through every syllable, her claim that a black man like Marcus couldn't be trusted resonating with the biases she'd banked on for decades. She leaned on her remaining influence, her voice steady as she cited unnamed sources, her hands folded calmly while she demanded his arrest for terrorism, the charge a death knell meant to erase him from the board, the crowd around the TV splitting. Further, some nodding in agreement, others muttering in disbelief. Marcus's chest tightening as he realized how easily she'd flipped the script, how quickly the system bent to shield her even now, her power a hydra that grew new heads. With every cut, he slipped away from the tent, his borrowed hoodie pulled tight as he melted into the crowd, his face obscured while cops swarmed the scene, their eyes scanning for him, Carver's warrant now live. Her spin taking root as headlines shifted from her corruption to his attack, the Tennessean running a split story with Simone's exposé buried under breaking news of the blast. The public's outrage muddied by doubt, his hero status eroding under the weight of her lies, the sting of it sharper than the glass in his hair as he ducked into an alley, his burner phone buzzing with a text from Keisha's second-in-command. Malik, confirming she'd survived the safe house raid with a bullet graze, a small relief in a sea of loss as he pocketed the device, his mind racing with how to fight this new label. Terrorism, a chain he couldn't break with evidence alone, not when Carver's voice still carried this much sway. The real blow landed that night, locked in a holding cell after a patrol spotted him near the alley, his cuffs tighter than before as he sat on a steel bench, the cold seeping into his bones, while a TV in the guard station blared Carver's latest move. Her press conference escalating as she claimed to have evidence tying him to extremist groups, her voice trembling with feigned sorrow as she announced she'd pushed a governor's aide to seek the death penalty, the words hitting Marcus like a freight train, his breath catching as he realized she'd turned a courthouse bombing into a capital case, her influence stretching to the State House. Despite the cracks in her armor, the racism in her push blatant, as she leaned on fears of black radicals, her endgame clear, to see him executed before he could speak again. The guard's smirk as he glanced at Marcus, a mirror of Hargrove's on the stand, the system closing. Ranks while he sat powerless, the death penalty a shadow he hadn't seen coming, its weight crushing the hope he'd clung to hours ago. He pressed his forehead against the cell wall, the concrete rough against his skin, as he traced the cuts on his knuckles, the evacuation replaying in his mind, the lives he'd saved now. A footnote in Carver's narrative, her counterattack so savage it turned his act of courage into a noose, the governor's aide a faceless pawn in her pocket, the death penalty, a guillotine she'd sharpened just for him, her refusal to lose driving her to heights of cruelty he hadn't imagined, even after the alley, the camera, the bounty hunters. This move a checkmate that left him staring at a clock he couldn't stop. He thought of Lena and Aisha, safe for now but marked by this war, their faces the only light in a cell that felt like a tomb, his resolve flickering but not dead, his mind clawing for a way out, knowing Carver's desperation meant she was scared, her empire teetering even as she tightened the rope, leaving him to wonder if he could turn her fear against her before the gavel fell for the last time. Marcus Ellison sat shackled in a Nashville County jail cell, the steel bench biting into his thighs as the TV in the guard station droned on about his death penalty case. Judge Evelyn Carver's voice a venomous hum through the static, her latest press conference branding him a terrorist mastermind. The weight of her lies heavier than the cuffs on his wrists, his bruised hands clenched into fists as he stared at the chipped paint on the wall, the courthouse explosion still flashing behind his eyes, the screams of the injured, a soundtrack to his confinement, his mind churning with how to escape this tomb she'd built for him, the death penalty a guillotine she'd sharpened with every ounce of her remaining power, her racism a blade aimed at his neck, while the world watched in split-screen horror and belief. The guard outside smirked through the bars, his boots tapping a lazy rhythm as he chewed gum, his casual cruelty a reminder of how deep Carver's influence ran, how easily she'd turned a hero into a pariah. But Marcus clung to a flicker of defiance, knowing the activists hadn't abandoned him. Their network a whisper in the dark he'd bet his last breath on. Their loyalty, the only thing keeping him sane as the clock ticked toward a lethal injection he didn't deserve. The jailbreak came at midnight, a sudden chaos that shattered the cell block's silence, the lights flickering as shouts erupted down. The hall, the clang of metal on metal ringing out as a dozen inmates surged from their cells, their fists pounding on bars while smoke curled from a trash can fire set in the yard, the staged riot unfolding with military precision. A plan Keisha's crew had cooked up while he'd been locked away, their courage a lifeline he hadn't dared hope for until it hit. Marcus pressed against the bars, his pulse racing as a shadow slipped through the haze. Malik, Keisha's second-in-command, his lean frame cloaked in a stolen guard uniform, his dark eyes sharp as he jammed a key into the lock, his voice a low growl as he told Marcus to move fast. The riot a 30-second window before the real guards regrouped, their batons already swinging as alarms blared overhead, the smoke stinging Marcus's lungs as he bolted free, his shackles clattering to the floor, his borrowed sneakers pounding. Concrete, while Malik led him through a service corridor, the walls vibrating with the chaos they'd unleashed, a symphony of rebellion that drowned out Carver's lies for one glorious moment. They slipped into a waiting van outside, the tires squealing as a driver named Tasha, a broad-shouldered woman with a buzz cut and a scar across her lip, floored, eyed through back streets, her knuckles white on the wheel as she dodged patrol cars, her voice steady as she confirmed Keisha was alive, holed up in a safe house with a bandaged arm. The news a jolt of relief that loosened the knot in Marcus's chest, his gratitude silent as he sank into the seat. The van's windows blacked out while Malik briefed him on the next move, a hideout in Clarksville 40 miles north, a place to regroup while the heat died down. The plan fragile but alive, their faith in him a fire he couldn't let burn out. He spent the drive piecing together his next strike, his mind returning to a tip from a dead whistleblower he'd represented years ago, a cop named Reggie who'd hinted at a safe deposit box with dirt on Carver before a random carjacking took his life. A lead Marcus had buried in grief until now, the memory surfacing like a lifeline as he directed Tasha to detour through downtown, his gut telling him Reggie's ghost might hold the key to ending this war. The risk a gamble he had to take while Carver's dogs hunted him across Tennessee. They hit the bank at dawn, Marcus slipping in with a hoodie and Reggie's old key, the teller's yawn masking her indifference as he accessed the box in a vault that smelled of dust and steel, his hands trembling as he pulled out a stack of papers and a microcassette. The tape's label faded but legible, Carver Confession, 1998. The words a thunderclap in his skull as he pocketed it, the papers detailing more. Bribes, more rigged cases, but the tape a weapon he hadn't dared dream of. His breath shallow as he rejoined Tasha outside, the van peeling away while he pressed play on a handheld recorder Malik had scavenged. Carver's voice crackling through decades of static, her tone cold as she bragged to an unseen ally about keeping those people in line, her racist rants naming black defendants she'd buried for cash, her laughter a chilling echo of the courtroom cackle that had started this nightmare, the recording a smoking gun that could blow her empire apart if he could get it to the right ears, his mind racing with plans to broadcast it nationwide, a beacon of truth in a storm of lies. But the victory was short-lived, a fleeting high before the crash, as Travis Hargrove struck back from the shadows, his tech skills a predator's claw, slashing through the activists' network, Marcus's burner phone buzzing with panic from Malik as they hit the Clarksville safe house, a squat brick building off a dirt road. The news grim as Travis had hacked their encrypted chat, exposing every safe house location to Carver's bounty hunters, his digital ambush a gut punch that left Marcus staring at the tape in his hand, its power useless if they couldn't survive the night, the realization sinking in as headlights flared outside, a SWAT team's armored truck rolling up with military precision, their boots hitting the ground as flashbangs shattered the windows. the room exploding into white light and noise, while Marcus dove for cover behind a couch, his ears ringing as Malik fired back, the tape clutched tight as he scrambled for an exit. The safe house now a kill zone, Carver had turned against them. The raid was relentless, bullets chewing through drywall as Marcus crawled toward a back door, his shoulder slamming against the frame as he burst into the freezing night, the Clarksville air sharp with frost, as he spotted a river glinting under the moon, its icy flow a desperate chance he took without thinking, his body plunging into the black water as SWAT shouts faded behind him, the cold seizing his lungs like a vice, his limbs thrashing as he fought the current, the tape stuffed in his pocket soaking through but intact, his vision blurring as he clawed for the far bank, the river's grip nearly drowning him, his gasp for air a ragged prayer as he dragged himself onto muddy ground. The safe house a glowing inferno in the distance, Malik's fate unknown, the SWAT team's betrayal a scream in his skull that Carver wouldn't stop, her counterattack a tidal wave meant to erase him before the tape could speak, leaving him shivering and alone. The truth, his only shield against a system that wanted him dead. How long can one man swim against a current of corruption this deep? What happens when the truth you hold is worth more than your life to those who'd kill to bury it? And who survives when allies fall in a war rigged from the start? Drop a comment with the number 1 if you think Marcus can turn Carver's own words against her. Hit like if you're stunned by how far she'll go to silence him, and subscribe, because this fight's hitting a boiling point you won't believe. What does a man do when the nation's eyes turn to him, but the bullets keep coming? Marcus Ellison stumbled onto the muddy riverbank in Clarksville, his soaked hoodie clinging to his shivering frame as the icy water dripped from his hair, the confession tape a sodden lump in his pocket, its plastic casing intact despite the plunge, his lungs burning as he coughed up the river's chill, his body trembling, but his mind blazing with the weight of Carver's voice on that microcassette, her racist rants a weapon he'd nearly drowned to protect, the distant glow of the safe house fire fading as he staggered into the woods, his sneakers squelching with every step, the night air sharp against his wet skin as he pushed toward a rendezvous point Malik had mapped out days ago, a gas station off Highway 79 where Tasha's van waited, her silhouette a beacon in the gloom as he collapsed into the passenger seat, his teeth chattering while she cranked the heat, her voice tight as she confirmed the SWAT raid had taken 3 activists, Malik among the missing, the loss a knife in his gut as he clutched the tape, its truth now his only leverage in a war that kept claiming lives. They drove in silence to a new hideout, a ramshackle cabin in the Cumberland Hills, its sagging porch creaking as Marcus limped inside, the tape drying on a rickety table while he borrowed Tasha's laptop, his fingers shaking as he digitized the audio, Carver's voice crackling through cheap speakers as she bragged about burying black defendants for cash, her laughter a jagged edge that cut deeper with every word, the recording a time capsule of hate he uploaded to a secure server, his breath steadying as he sent it to every news outlet he could think of. The Tennessean, CNN, MSNBC, the file tagged with a simple note, Judge Evelyn Carver's truth, his hands hovering over the keys as he hit send, the act a flare in the dark that could either save him or light his pyre, the stakes higher than ever as he slumped back, the cabin's damp walls closing in, while he waited for the world to wake up to what he'd unleashed. By morning, the tape was everywhere, breaking news banners flashing Carver's name across screens nationwide, her voice echoing from phones and TVs as anchors stumbled over her words. Those people don't belong in my courtroom unless they're in chains. The clip looping with a trigger warning while protests erupted in Nashville, Atlanta, Chicago, the chants of justice for Marcus swelling into a roar that shook city streets. The hashtags The Carver Confession and Free Marcus trending as millions shared the audio, their outrage a tidal wave that crashed against Carver's crumbling empire, her suspension announced by noon, the state judiciary scrambling to distance itself as investigators raided her office, her silver hair a fleeting glimpse on live feeds as she stormed out, her face a mask of fury that couldn't hide the cracks. Marcus watching from the cabin's cracked TV, his chest tight with a hope he hadn't felt since the courthouse doors first opened, the nation's eyes finally seeing what he'd bled to prove, his name a rallying cry instead of a curse. But Carver didn't flinch, her counterattack a venomous strike from the shadows, her suspension a slap on the wrist she turned into a war drum as she hired a hitman, a wiry ex-con named Vance with a shaved head and a rap sheet longer than Marcus's arm. His orders whispered through back channels, while Marcus prepared to speak at a Nashville protest rally that night, the crowd swelling outside the Capitol steps, their signs bobbing like waves as he stepped onto a makeshift stage, his borrowed jacket patched at the elbow, his voice raw but steady as he played the tape again. The speakers crackling with Carver's hate, while thousands roared back, their fists raised in defiance, the moment electric until a gunshot split the air. The bullet grazing Marcus's shoulder as he dove behind a podium, blood soaking his sleeve while the crowd screamed, Vance melting into the chaos as cops swarmed, their batons swinging at protesters instead of the shooter. The scene a battlefield Carver had orchestrated to reclaim her narrative, Marcus's wound a burning proof she'd killed to keep her throne. He stumbled backstage, Tasha pressing a rag to his shoulder as medics rushed in, the pain a white-hot pulse that sharpened his senses, his survival a headline as cameras caught the blood, the image going viral within minutes. Marcus Ellison. Shot at rally, the nation's outrage doubling as he became a martyr in real time, his face plastered across screens while donations poured into activist funds, his words from the stage replaying, "This is what they fear, our voices together," the clip a mantra that fueled marches nationwide. Carver's suspension now a hollow gesture as calls for her arrest grew louder, Marcus's shoulder throbbing but his spirit unbroken. The hit a misstep she couldn't spin, the crowd's fury a shield he hadn't expected, their love a balm against the hate that had hunted him since day one. He sat in an ambulance, his arm bandaged as Tasha relayed updates, her voice shaking with pride as she said they'd won this round, the tape and the shooting turning Carver into a pariah even her allies couldn't defend. A fleeting victory that felt like breathing room after months underwater. Yet Carver doubled down, her next blow landing before Marcus could leave the ambulance, her voice on a late-night news feed claiming Vance was a lone racist, a rogue actor she'd never met, her denial a slick lie as she distanced herself from the hit, her pale hands folded calmly while she dropped a bombshell, announcing she'd uncovered evidence tying Marcus's family to the rally shooting, her words twisting the knife as she accused Lena and Aisha of aiding his terrorist agenda. The lie so audacious it stunned the anchors, her influence flexing one last time as cops raided the safe house where Lena and Aisha hid. Their arrests. Broadcast live. Lena's face stoic as cuffs snapped around her wrists, Aisha sobbing while dragged from her friend's home, the footage a gut punch Marcus felt through the ambulance's open door. His family now pawns in Carver's endgame. The racism in her accusation blatant as she painted them as threats, her desperation a wildfire that burned everything he loved to keep her afloat, leaving him clutching the stretcher's edge, his wound forgotten as his world shattered again. He stared at the TV, the medic's voice a distant hum as Lena's eyes met the camera, her strength a silent promise she'd endure, Aisha's tears a wound he couldn't heal, Carver's move a checkmate that turned his victory sour, the nation's support meaningless if he couldn't save them, his mind racing with how she'd pulled this off, how deep her tendrils reached to frame his wife and daughter, the hitman a distraction while she played her real card, her refusal to lose driving her to depths of cruelty he hadn't fathomed even after bombs and bounty hunters. This strike a personal annihilation, meant to break him where bullets couldn't. He ripped off the bandage, the pain grounding him as he vowed to fight back, the tape still out there, the protests still raging, his family's arrests a spark. That could ignite something bigger, leaving him to wonder if he could turn this loss into a weapon before Carver's next move crushed them all. Marcus Ellison sat in the back of the ambulance, the bandage on his grazed shoulder peeling loose as the TV blared the footage of Lena and Aisha's arrests, their faces etched with defiance and fear under the harsh glare of police lights. Judge. Evelyn Carver's voice a venomous thread weaving through the broadcast. Her accusation that they'd aided his terrorist agenda, a lie so grotesque it turned his stomach. The pain in his arm a dull ache compared to the fire in his chest. His family now captives in a war he'd started, but couldn't shield them. From the nation's protests. A distant roar as he ripped free of the medic's grip, his borrowed jacket stained with blood as he staggered out, Tasha's shout fading behind him while he slipped into the Nashville night, his mind a storm of rage and desperation. The confession tape's victory hollow when Carver could still strike this deep, her racism a noose tightening around the people he loved most, leaving him with one reckless move to turn the tide. He tracked Travis Hargrove to a seedy bar off Printer's Alley, his tech-savvy tormentor drowning his losses in cheap whiskey. Marcus's hoodie pulled low as he watched from a corner booth, the neon buzz of the jukebox masking his shallow breaths, his shoulder throbbing with every heartbeat as he pieced together the plan, knowing Travis was the key to unraveling Carver's latest frame-up, his hacking skills the thread that had tied Lena and Aisha to her lies. The bar's dim light glinting off the man's shaved head as he laughed with a bartender, oblivious to the storm closing in, Marcus's hands steady despite the pain as he slipped out, circling to the alley where Travis's truck sat, its tinted windows a perfect trap for what came next. He waited in the shadows, his breath fogging in the cool air, the weight of the tape in his pocket a reminder of what he'd already survived, the arrests a wound he couldn't bandage, his resolve hardening into something feral as Travis stumbled. Out at closing time, his keys jangling while Marcus lunged, his good arm locking around the man's throat, dragging him into the truck's cab with a grunt, the door slamming shut as he pinned Travis against the seat, a pocket knife from Tasha's van pressed to his neck, the blade's edge a whisper of steel that made Travis freeze, his eyes wide, with panic as Marcus growled for a confession now, or he'd bleed out right there. Travis stammered, his voice a slurred mess as Marcus tightened his grip, the knife drawing a thin bead of blood. The man's fear, a stench that filled the cab. As he admitted to hacking the activist network, planting the evidence on Marcus's laptop, faking the files that linked Lena and Aisha to the rally shooting, his words spilling out like a dam breaking, every syllable implicating Carver as the architect, her orders barked through late night calls, her bribes wired to his offshore account, the confession of flood Marcus recorded on his burner phone, the live stream app already rolling as he forced Travis to face the camera, millions watching in real time as the truth bled out, the tech whiz's pale face a canvas of guilt while Marcus's voice cut through, steady and raw, naming Carver as the puppet master, her racism the fuel for every move, the stream a wildfire spreading across screens nationwide, protests flaring anew as viewers saw the man who'd framed a family confess under duress, Marcus's gamble, a spotlight that burned brighter than Carver's lies, his shoulders screaming, but his will unbreakable as he held Travis there, the knife, a promise he wouldn't hesitate to keep. The stream crashed mid-confession, the screen going black as Carver's allies cut the signal, their panic a silent scream across the digital void, but the damage was done. Travis's words already viral, snippets shared in furious bursts as hashtags like "I'm Carver Court" surged, the nation's outrage a thunderclap that shook her crumbling throne. Marcus shoving Travis out of the truck as sirens wailed in the distance, the man collapsing in the alley while Marcus slipped away, his burner phone buzzing with updates from Tasha, her voice tight as she said the protests were doubling. Lena and Aisha's arrests now a rallying cry, the confession a spark that could free them if he could stay alive long enough to fan it. He melted into the shadows, his blood-soaked sleeve a badge of survival, the city pulsing with anger he'd ignited, a fleeting hope that this could break Carver's grip, that his family might walk free, the knife still clenched in his hand. As he ducked into a boarded-up storefront, his breath ragged but his mind racing with how to press this advantage, the live stream's abrupt end a warning that Carver wasn't done, her next move already brewing in the dark. She struck at dawn, her retaliation a sledgehammer across Nashville, a citywide curfew announced on every channel, her voice claiming riots Marcus had incited, her suspension ignored as she pulled strings from the shadows, the curfew targeting black neighborhoods with military precision, cops in riot gear flooding streets, while helicopters buzzed overhead, their spotlights carving through the morning mist. Her order, a blanket of oppression meant to choke the protests, to silence the truth Travis had spilled, the racism in her. Decree blatant as she turned communities into prisons, her desperation a wildfire that burned hotter with every loss. Marcus watched from the storefront, the TV flickering with footage of armored vans rolling through East Nashville, his old street locked down while neighbors banged on doors, their shouts a chorus of defiance she couldn't mute, the curfew a cage he'd forced her to build. Her fear of the tape's power driving her to this extreme, a misstep that could turn the city against her if he could light the match. The final blow came that night, a militia hired by Carver, hitting harder than any cop, their pickup trucks roaring into Marcus's childhood neighborhood near Fisk University, their Molotov cocktails shattering against his old house, the clapboard walls erupting in flames, as a neighbor who'd sheltered him years ago screamed from the porch, her gray hair singed as she fled, the fire swallowing her home while the militia sped off, their laughter a sick echo of Carver's courtroom cackle, the attack broadcast by a protester's shaky phone, the footage going viral as the neighbor's cries pierced the night. Her death a body blow. Marcus felt through the screen, his knees buckling as he realized she'd paid for his fight. Her name, Miss Ruth, a ghost in his throat as he sank against the wall, the firebombing a massacre meant to break him. Carver's refusal to lose now a trail of ash and blood, the curfew a distraction while she burned his past to cinders, leaving him clutching the knife, his rage a furnace that could either forge a weapon or consume him whole. He stood, the storefront's gloom a shroud as he pocketed the tape. Miss Ruth's death a scar he'd carry forever, the militia's attack a line crossed that turned his grief into steel, Carver's escalation a sign she was unraveling, her empire teetering, on the edge of collapse if he could push it over. The protests now a war cry he'd lead. Lena and Aisha's faces the fuel that kept him moving, the knife a promise he'd wield again, his breaking point a forge where despair became defiance, leaving him to wonder how much more he could lose before he brought her down, or if this war would claim him first. Marcus Ellison stood in the boarded-up storefront, the flickering TV casting shadows across his blood-streaked face, as Miss Ruth's burning home replayed in a protester's shaky footage, her screams a raw wound in his chest, the militias, firebombing a slaughter Judge Evelyn Carver had ordered to break him, the curfew sirens wailing outside, while Nashville choked under her iron grip. His shoulder wound a dull throb beneath his torn hoodie as he pocketed the confession tape, its damp plastic a lifeline he'd clung to through river and raid, his rage a molten core that forged his next move, the knife in his hand a vow as he slipped into the night, his breath fogging in the crisp air while he headed for Tasha's van, her headlights a faint pulse in the alley as she waited, her jaw tight with grief for Miss Ruth, her voice steady as she agreed to drive him to Carver's mansion, the final stand he'd planned since Travis's confession, cracked the city wide open. A gamble to end this war before it claimed Lena and Aisha too. They rolled through curfew-locked streets, the van's engine a low growl as Tasha dodged checkpoints, her buzz cut glinting under streetlights, while Marcus briefed the activists over a burner phone, their network battered but unbroken, their voices a chorus of fury as he outlined the infiltration, a dozen of them converging on Carver's sprawling estate in Belle Meade, its white columns a mockery of justice under the moon, the plan a desperate thrust to seize her ledger, the paper trail of every bribe and murder she'd buried over decades, a document he'd glimpsed in Travis's files, its location a hunch he'd bet everything on, his shoulder pulsing with every jolt of the van while Tasha parked in a wooded cul-de-sac, the team slipping through shadows with bolt cutters and silenced resolve, their footsteps crunching on frost as they cut through the estate's fence, the night a cloak for a reckoning Carver couldn't outrun. They breached the mansion at 2 in the morning, Marcus leading the charge through a servant's entrance, his knife prying the lock while Tasha flanked him, her handgun drawn as they moved past marble floors and gilded frames, the air thick with the scent of lavender and old money. Carver's sanctuary a fortress of privilege he'd tear apart brick by brick, the activists fanning out to secure exits while he climbed the grand staircase, his sneakers silent on plush carpet as he reached her study, its oak door ajar, a faint glow spilling out where she sat at a desk, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her pale hands flipping through a leather-bound ledger, her eyes snapping. Up as Marcus stepped in, the knife glinting in his fist while she froze, her smirk fading into a snarl as she realized her empire's walls had fallen, the curfew's chaos a distraction. He'd turned against her, his voice low as he demanded the ledger now or he'd take it from her cold hands. She laughed, a brittle sound that cracked the silence, her fingers tightening on the book as she spat that he'd never win, that men like him didn't belong in her world, her racism a venom she couldn't hide, her words a confession he recorded on his burner phone, the app rolling as he stepped closer, his shadow looming over her desk while she lunged for a drawer, her hand emerging with a pistol, its barrel trembling as she aimed at his chest, her voice shrill as she screamed about ending this herself. The ledger's secrets worth more than his life, her finger tightening on the trigger while Marcus dove, his knife slashing her wrist, the gun clattering to the floor as she shrieked, blood splattering the pages she'd killed to protect, his good arm pinning her down while Tasha burst in, her gun trained on Carver, as Marcus snatched the ledger, its ink-stained leather heavy with decades of corruption, every name, every dollar, every murder a nail in her coffin he'd hammer home. He flipped it open, his eyes scanning entries that stretched back 30 years, payments to Hargrove, to cops, to hitmen who'd silenced whistleblowers like Reggie, the dates matching cases he'd lost, lives he'd mourned, the scope a labyrinth, curve evil that made his stomach churn. Carver's recorded rant a perfect capstone as he played it back, her voice snarling through the phone, "You'll never touch me. I own this city." The admission a rope around her neck, while Tasha zip-tied her wrists, her pale face twisting with rage as she spat curses, her empire crumbling in real time. The activists downstairs shouting they'd found more files, bank records, burner, phones, a treasure trove Marcus would hand to the FBI, his breath steadying as he realized this could free Lena and Aisha, could bury Carver for good, the ledger a torch to light her downfall if he could get it out alive. But the victory shattered. As boots thundered up the stairs, Dale Hargrove crashing through the study door, his uniform traded for tactical gear, his pistol blazing as he fired, the first shot tearing through an activist named Jamal who'd followed Tasha, the young man's body crumpling with a choked gasp, blood pooling on the carpet while Marcus dove for cover, Hargrove's roar filling the room as he emptied his clip, bullets shredding bookshelves and glass. His loyalty to Carver a death pact he'd die to keep, his aim swinging toward Marcus as Tasha returned fire, her shots grazing Hargrove's arm. While Marcus scrambled for the gun Carver had dropped, his fingers closing around its grip as he rolled, the ledger clutched under his arm, the chaos a blur of smoke and screams while he fired back, the bullet catching Hargrove in the thigh, the cop collapsing with a howl as Marcus bolted, Tasha dragging him out while Carver shrieked behind them, her voice a banshee's wail as they fled through the mansion, the remaining activists scattering. Into the night, their van peeling away with sirens closing in. Marcus clutched the ledger in the back seat, his hands slick with sweat and Jamal's blood, the activist's death a weight he couldn't shake, Tasha's knuckles white on the wheel as she raced toward an FBI drop point in Franklin, the plan shifting mid-flight as they dodged patrol cars, his burner phone buzzing with news that Carver's arrest warrant had hit the wires, her mansion raid a breaking story as choppers circled overhead, the ledger's handover a sprint against time while Hargrove's ambush replayed in his skull, the cop's survival a loose end he couldn't tie, the cost of this fight piling up in bodies and scars, his resolve a frayed thread holding him together as they reached the drop, an agent in a dark suit taking the ledger with a nod, the evidence. Secure as Carver's cuffs snapped on live TV, her scream of his name a promise of revenge that echoed through the feed, her vow to rig jurors from prison a chilling coda to a night of fire and blood, leaving Marcus to slump against the van. The war won, but the battlefield still smoking. Marcus Ellison slumped against the van's cracked vinyl seat, the ledger's weight gone from his hands, as the FBI agent vanished into the Franklin night, the distant wail of sirens a fading echo of Carver's downfall, his shoulder wound a steady throb beneath his blood-soaked hoodie, the air thick with exhaust and relief as Tasha idled the engine, her buzz cut damp with sweat while she stared ahead, her silence a mirror to his own exhaustion. The ledger's handover a torch passed to hands he prayed wouldn't drop it. The fight that had cost Miss Ruth Jamal and pieces of his soul, now teetering on a razor's edge, as he waited for the world to catch up. His breath shallow while the burner phone buzzed with news of Carver's arrest, her silver hair wild on live TV as cuffs snapped around her wrists, her scream of his name a venomous promise that rattled his bones, her vow to rig jurors from prison a shadow he couldn't shake. The victory bittersweet as he pictured Lena and Aisha still locked away, their faces the only fuel keeping him upright in a war that refused to end cleanly. By dawn, the tide turned, the ledger's contents spilling across headlines like oil on water. Every bribe, every murder, every rigged case a stain Carver couldn't scrub. The FBI raiding her allies' offices, while protests swelled outside the jail where Lena and Aisha were held. Their chants a thunderclap that shook the bars, Tasha's voice cracking as she relayed the update. The governor ordering their release under pressure, the curfew lifting as Nashville exhaled, Marcus climbing out of the van to meet them at the jail's gates, his legs trembling as Lena stepped free. Her braids loose but her eyes fierce, Aisha clinging to her side with tear-streaked cheeks, their embrace a collision of relief and grief that buckled his knees. His family whole again while cameras flashed, the nation hailing him a hero, his name a banner on signs that read, "Ellison won," the weight of their freedom, a balm to wounds he'd carry forever, the tape's truth and the ledger's proof. A double-edged sword that had cut Carver down at last. Her suspension now a life sentence as her trial loomed, the courthouse bombing a footnote to her corruption's collapse. They drove home in silence. The East Nashville streets quiet for the first time in weeks. The spray-painted slurs on their walls, painted over by neighbors who'd marched for them. The broken window fixed with a pane that gleamed under the morning sun. Marcus's hand resting on Aisha's shoulder as Lena unlocked the door. The living room a sanctuary reclaimed. The couch cushions still dented from before this nightmare began. Their steps slow as they sank into it. The TV flickering with Carver's perp walk. Her pale face drained of power while anchors dissected her ledger. The charges piling up, bribery, obstruction, murder for hire. The death penalty now her shadow instead of his. Jamal Carter's case dismissed that afternoon, the young man's grin a fleeting image on the screen as Marcus exhaled. The fight's end a quiet he hadn't known in months. His family's safety. A prize he'd clawed through hell to win. The cost etched in every scar, every lost friend, every sleepless night that had led to this fragile peace. The celebration came that night, a makeshift gathering on their street, neighbors bringing folding, chairs and potluck dishes, their voices a hum of gratitude as they toasted Marcus with plastic cups, kids running through the yard while music played from a portable speaker, Aisha laughing for the first time in weeks, Lena's hand steady in his as they watched. The community, a shield he hadn't expected. Their love a brick wall against the hate that had hunted them. The hero label a weight he didn't want but couldn't shed. His mind drifting to Miss Ruth's burned-out home, to Jamal's blood on Carver's carpet. The losses a ledger of their own he'd balance in silence. His shoulder aching as he stood to speak. His voice rough but clear as he thanked them. The tape and ledger now public record, Carver's trial a storm on the horizon he'd face from the sidelines. The fight won, but the war eternal. His family's smiles a light he'd guard with his life. But the twist landed like a brick through glass. A quiet moment shattered as the crowd thinned. A juror from Jamal's original case slipping through the shadows. A wiry white man named Paul with a nervous tick in his jaw, his hands trembling. As he pressed a folded note into Marcus's palm, his whisper urgent, as he said he'd been paid by Carver years ago, a secret he'd buried until the ledger broke him open. His eyes darting as he fled into the night, Marcus unfolding the paper with a sinking dread, the words scrawled in black ink, a revelation that stole his breath. She trained others, a network of judges. They're still out there, the names listed below a roll call of power he'd never touched. 5 judges across Tennessee, Alabama, Kentucky, her protégés poised to carry her legacy. Their benches a web of racism he'd only scratched. The victory he'd claimed a single battle in a war he hadn't won. The note a bomb that rewrote everything he'd fought for. Carver's scream on TV, now a taunt from a hydra with heads he couldn't see. He stood frozen, the note crumpling in his fist as Lena called from the porch. Her voice a tether he clung to while Aisha chased fireflies in the yard. The celebration's warmth a lie against this cold truth. His mind racing with the scope of it, judges he'd faced. Cases he'd lost, lives he'd mourned, all tied to a machine Carver had built. Her arrest a distraction while her shadow stretched on. The system's roots deeper than he'd feared. Its racism a cancer he'd only biopsied, not cured. The note a call he couldn't ignore. His shoulders, fake a reminder of what he'd endured. What he'd have to endure again. The fight not over but reborn. A network of gavels waiting to strike. Their silence a threat louder than Carver's vow. He burned the note in a trash can fire. the flames licking the paper to ash as he watched, his jaw tight with a resolve that hadn't died, the smoke curling into the night while he vowed to keep going, to find them, to break them. The heroes. Crown a burden he'd wear until every last one fell, his family's laughter a shield he'd wield against this new dark. The war's next chapter, a whisper he'd chase to its end. He turned back to the house, the TV now off, the street quiet as neighbors drifted home, Lena's hand finding his in the doorway, Aisha's yawn a soft note as she climbed the stairs. The peace a fragile gift he'd protect with everything left in him. Carver's trial a beginning, not an end. The network's shadow a beast he'd hunt, his knife still in his pocket, its edge a promise he'd keep, the fight a marathon he'd run until his legs gave out, or until justice wasn't just a word but a truth they could all touch. He locked the door, the click a final sound in a night of endings and beginnings, the camera panning from their porch to a figure in the distance, a silhouette watching from a parked car, its engine idling low, the hint of a badge gleaming in the dark, the war's next soldier waiting while Marcus slept, the battle won but the enemy unbroken, leaving the night to hold its secrets until he rose to face them again. This story reveals the brutal reality of systemic racism and the unyielding fight required to challenge it. Marcus Ellison's journey teaches us that justice isn't a gift. It's a battle waged against entrenched power, often at a staggering personal cost. His persistence, despite beatings, frame-ups, and the loss of loved ones, shows that resilience and cunning can crack even the toughest corrupt systems. Carver's downfall proves that evil thrives in silence, but exposure, through evidence like the tape and ledger, can topple giants, though not without scars. The story underscores the collective power of community, with activists and neighbors banding together to amplify Marcus's voice, reminding us that no one wins alone. Yet, the twist of a hidden network of judges unveils a deeper lesson. Victories against injustice are rarely final. Racism isn't one villain but a hydra, regrowing heads when one is cut. Marcus's choice to keep fighting, even after reclaiming his family, highlights the need for relentless vigilance, turning personal pain into a broader crusade. It's a call to recognize the unseen battles others face and to question the systems we trust. What's the takeaway? Truth can prevail, but only if we refuse to look away, no matter how ugly it gets. So, what will you do when you see corruption hiding in plain sight? Drop a comment if this story fired you up to stand against injustice. Hit like if Marcus's grit inspires you. Subscribe for more tales of defiance and share to spread the fight. Thanks for joining this journey. May you find strength to challenge the shadows in your own world.